Hello and welcome to this video about CSS Grid. In this video, we're going to explore the CSS Grid and how we can use this grid to create two-dimensional layouts. If you remember, in previous videos, we talked about Flex. In Flex, we only had the direction in row or column based on the Flex direction. But in Grid, we can actually position elements in different rows and in different columns. That's why we can use it for two-dimensional layouts. Inside the VS Code, I have this empty HTML file here, and I have style.css that is empty, and I have reference.style.css inside my HTML file. I'm running this HTML file with the live server extension, and I can see the preview here in my browser. Alright, so I'm gonna move this style.css to the side and collapse the sidebar to see the both style.css and index.html file at the same time. Let's go ahead and remove this headline here and create a div element for the grid container. And inside that, let's go ahead and create a div element with the class of box. Let's make it 7 times. So we have 7 boxes inside this div. I'm going to add a class of container to this parent div and 7 boxes inside that. Let's select the container and add the display of grid. This will make the container a grid container. Now to showcase this, I'm going to go ahead and select all the boxes and add the width of 100 pixels, height of 100 pixels, the background color of light blue this time, and let's make them round as well, like say border radius 10 pixels. So let's inspect this inside the browser. You can see we have these boxes all here stacked vertically. Let's open the DevTools, and I'm gonna collapse this bottom tab and select this div with the container of grid. And now you can see we have this grid button here in the DevTools. I'm gonna click on that and it will show me the grid layout inside the browser preview. So these are the rows. We can see we have multiple rows for the grid container, and we can modify the number of rows and columns. And that is the exact same thing that we're going to do. The first 2 properties that we're going to talk about are called grid template columns and grid template rows, and we will add them to the container. So here I say grid template columns. With this, we can define number of columns with their space. As an example, I say 200 pixels and 300 pixels. So this means that we will have 2 columns, and column 1 will have 200 pixels of width, and the second column will have 300 pixels of width. It's very simple. It's a template for columns. So let's go ahead and preview the browser. I'm gonna reduce the width of this DevTools here. We have 2 columns, and this column has 200 pixels of width, and the other one has 300 pixels, just like that. I'm going to duplicate this down and write this for the rows as well. We can do the same for the rows. Just note that we have 7 boxes, so we cannot have 2 columns and 2 rows. That's not possible. 2 columns and we'll have 2 items. Repeat that 4 times. And to do that, we're going to consider each row 200 pixels and actually repeat this 4 times. So 200 pixels and 200 pixels. Let's go ahead and see the preview. Now you can see we have the layout. So we have 2 columns and each of them show up by 2 in a row. We can actually duplicate this here and make it a 3 column. Let me zoom out a little bit. Now you can see we have 3 columns. A good way of not repeating yourself is to use a CSS function called repeat, like this. Now we say repeat 200 pixels 2 times. So if we take a look at the preview, now you can see we have 2 rows. Or we can make it 3. So now we will have 3 columns. So we can do the same at the bottom as well. So instead of repeating this 4 times, we can provide this and make it like 4 times, like that. And since we don't have enough boxes, the other grid places are empty. And if I duplicate another box here, it will fill this available area. Beautiful. So now we can see that with grid template columns and grid template rows, we are applying these properties to the container. Instead of just pixels, we can actually use another unit called FR, or fraction. When we say one fraction, it means equal fraction space for each. So one fraction is basically means that split the whole width into equal spaces. Now this means that the width that we have for each column is exactly equivalent to the other columns. So this is about FR, and we can mix them together. So we can say 2 FR and 100 pixels. So the first column will be 100 pixels, and the column 2 and column 3, we're gonna split the available width. So this one has 100 pixels and it contains the box, and the available width splits up into these two other columns. So you can see whenever I increase or decrease the width equally splits up for the column 2 and column 3. The next topic that we're going to talk about for the container is called gap. We can add gaps between the columns and rows. So right now you can see there's no gap, and whenever the column 1 ends, the column 2 starts. Rows, we can say column gap like 10 pixels. So if we take a look at the preview, now you can see we have this gap here between the columns. We can do the same for the row as well. So we can say row gap. Now we have the gap between the rows as well. So here we have it. And we can mix them together and say grid gap, basically to add it to the both. So now we have 3 properties for a grid container to place items in each row and column. So right now, consider this box here. This is column 2 in row 1, this box. This starts at the top and at the left. We can change its position and make it at the right and top, or center and center. And to do that, we have a couple of properties. The first one is justify items. And this one, for example, we can say center, aligns grid items along the horizontal line. So now you can see it doesn't start from the start, it is at the center. And the next one is called align items. So I can say center. So now the box is placed at the center. Previously it was at the top left. With justify items, we can place it horizontally, and with align items, we can place it vertically. These are about items. And there's a shorthand for that called place items. And we can say center and center. Instead of repeating justify items and align items, we can use place items. Basically centers the items horizontally and vertically. So right now it's center and center. All right, so far we have the container that takes the entire width and height of the grid container itself. So the grid that we currently have inside the container takes the entire width and height. The reason for that is because we are using this fraction here. If I remove the fraction and put 200 pixels here, the grid itself is not taking the entire container because the container has the whole width, but the grid itself is at the start of that. And we can change this placement with a couple of properties that we have. For example, we have justify content. If I set it to center, this will horizontally set it to the center. So now you can see instead of the start, it is at the center. So this grid is centralized. And then we also have align content. And this will basically centralize it vertically. So we don't have the concept of vertical here because it takes the entire height. And the reason that it takes the entire height and we cannot see the vertical alignment for the content is because we should remove a couple of these boxes. And now we can see the grid. So right now we are repeating the grid rows 4 times. And if we repeat it only 1 time, so now you can see it has only 2 columns with 1 row. Now let's go ahead and for the container add the height of, as an example, 600 pixels. So now the container has the entire height and width, and you can see the grid is at the center of that. And the reason for that is because this align content. If I send it to start, it will go to the top instead of the center. So it's very easy to memorize them. Align items and justify items are about the items inside the grid, and justify content and align content are about the grid itself inside the container. And as always, we also have this grid button inside the CSS that we can play with it. You can see we have align content and justify content, and align items and justify items. For example, this item that is here is centralized right now. Let's say we want to put it at here, at the end and at the right section. So to do that, for horizontal alignment of the item, we can say justify items to the end. So it goes to the end. And for the vertical alignment, we can say align items to the end. Now it sticks to the right section and at the end of the section. Now for placement of this entire grid inside the container, we can use the align content. Right now it is at the top. We can put it at the end and it goes all the way to down. And we can also set it at the right section here as well with justify content to this. So it moves to the right. So far we've been talking about the styles that we add to the container, but we also have a couple of properties that we can add to the items directly. And let's go ahead and talk about those. All right, so let's go ahead and add a couple of styles to the items. I'm going to remove these comments here and actually remove the place items and place content and only keep the display, template columns, template rows, and gap. I'm going to bring back the boxes as well and add the box-3 class to this third box that we have here. And with this, we can select that box tree specifically to add a couple of styles to that. I'm going to collapse this .box style to see the both container styles and the box tree that we are about to add. For the box 3, let's mark it with a new background, and I'm going to say light coral. This third box is a bit different than the others. Inside the template rows, we are defining one row. Let's go ahead and create 6 rows. With this, now we have the boxes there comfortably. And also let's increase the width of the first column to 300 pixels. So with this, we have 300 pixels of width for the first column and 200 pixels for the next one. The first one is called grid column. And this grid column is kind of like a magic that we can actually place a grid item specifically in a place. So right now, this box, just because is the third box, shows up at the third place. So 1, 2, and 3. But we can change that. We can change it with grid column. So we can say 1/3. This means that the grid column in this box should start at the first column and end at the 3. And if we go back here, you can see we have a couple of numbers here. So this has 1 and we have 2 here. And also we have 1 here, 2 here, and 3 here. These are numbers that we have for the rows and columns. So when we say grid column start 1 and end at 3, means start here and end at the 3, that is here. So right now you can see this box takes the entire width here. And the box that we had here jumps to the next position because this one is taking the entire width technically. If I select that box, you can see it starts at the first column, which is this column, 2 and ends at 3. If I change this one to 2, it will be just like before. So you can see it starts at the 1 and 2. So this place is empty and there's a box there. What will happen if we set it to 4? Well, we don't have the fourth column, right? But it will go ahead and create the fourth column as well. You can see it created a new column that overflows and causes the horizontal scroll. It takes the places of the columns of 1, 2, 3 until the 4. Now, the question here is why this column is empty right now, but at the bottom you can see we have items here. Well, the reason for that is because the third item that we have here cannot appear here because it will always start at the first column and expand to the fourth column. So this one has no way to contain a box and stays empty. And let's set it back to the 3 and do the same for rows as well. So we can say grid row and set it to start at 2 and end at 4. So now it starts at the 2, which is this one, and ends at the 4 and causes the third row to be empty and pushes all the boxes to the next row. Let's change this one to 1 now. Let's see what will happen right now. So it starts at the first and ends at the 4th. But which box is this? And what happened to the previous boxes? Well, if I select this first box, you can see the first box appears here. Now you can see even though this third box is the number 3 in the list of boxes, but it appears at the first position. And this first box that we have inside the container appears at the 4th row. Now you can see how Grid can change the position of elements both in columns and rows. So another way to write these values, so instead of saying that start at 1 and end at 3, we can say span 3. This means that from its original position, span 3 columns. So it says that from its original position, it starts at the first row. The reason for that is because we have this grid row here. I'm going to comment this line temporarily. So now it starts at the second row as it should. But for the columns, it takes 2 columns. If we set it back to 1, you can see it only takes 1 column. This way, we cannot change its original position. We can only give it a span, the number of column or rows that it can take. And we can do the same for the row as well. We can say span 2. That means that take 2 rows after your original position. You can see it is in this column, but the next row is also empty. This is very cool. And just imagine how hard that would be doing this with Flexbox. I mean, I don't even think we can do such thing without duplicating or repeating a lot of stuff around. Cool. The next topic that we're going to talk about is called grid area. This is a powerful way to place items by referencing their name. We will add a couple of other class names to other boxes. So I'm gonna say like box A and box B and box C for these 3 boxes at the end. Let's go ahead and remove the box tree classes that we have here and select the box A and add the grid area. Grid area of A, I'm gonna name the grid area for the box A, this box A. Do the same for both B and C as well. So C and B. So box A, grid area A, box B, grid area B, this box, and then box C. So now at the container that we have the grid template columns and rows, we can say grid template areas. And with this, we can add the areas by the name of the boxes. As an example, I'm gonna say AA, hit enter, BB, and hit enter C and C. So the reason I'm doing this is because we have 2 columns and each of these represent a row. This basically says that at the first row, put the A and A. And then in the second row, put the B and B. And in the third row, put the C and C. To actually see the boxes, let's go ahead and add the A, B, and C to the boxes as well. So if we go to the preview, you can see at the top level, we have A and A here. It takes the 2 columns. And B here, and then C and C, and then the rest of elements. So instead of doing this, I'm going to remove this and bring the C here. So let's see what will happen now. So now you can see we have A and takes this column as well, and then B and then C. This is exactly the kind of layout that we have here, A, B, C, basically A, B, C. And we can change this one to something like A, B, and let's set it to C and C. So you can see it A, B, C, C. Now you can see that how much powerful the CSS Grid is. With this, there are huge capabilities that we can use for layouts or anything that we can imagine. All right, so this was all about the CSS Grid. There are a lot of concepts here that we talked about, and you can check out the reference website if you ever need it. So you can never ever forget about something or miss something or stuck at any place. You can check out this reference website. And the last thing that we're going to talk about is actually creating an example for a layout. So I'm going to copy this HTML that we have here and paste it inside the body. I'm going to remove everything inside the body and just keep this. You can see we have a page layout. We have the header. We have the sidebar, we have the main content, and we have the footer. And let's say we want to have the header at the top, sidebar at the left, main content in the main area, and footer at the bottom. Now just look at this grid template area and see how easy that would be if we use this grid template areas. And inside the reference website, you can see we have the header. We named it header. Sidebar is grid area sidebar, main content is main, and footer is footer. And inside the container, I've set grid template areas for header and header, sidebar and main, and footer. We have two columns. One column here you can see is 200 pixels of width, and the rest is for the second column. I'm gonna copy the style.css from here and paste it here. Now, if we go to the preview, you can see this is how it looks like. We have the header, sidebar, main content, and footer. Now, just imagine how easy that would be to change the sidebar from left to right, or changing the width of the sidebar. It is very easy. All we have to do is just reduce this value here. You can see it changes and only affects the sidebar. Now you can understand the real power of Grid. So that's it all about the CSS Grid. In the next video, we're going to talk about the best practices and some workflow tips. This is not going to be the last video of our CSS course because we're going to talk about the cafe menu project that we had inside the HTML course and style it. And at the end, we're going to create a landing page project from HTML and CSS from scratch. But in next video, we're going to talk about some tips and tricks for writing better CSS. So see you there.